designed our talk to look at the question of environment and mobile phones and how they can be used to solve some of the world's biggest challenges. This also reflects work that WWF and IIASA have been doing together. So we'll look at environmental challenges and opportunities. We'll look at the theory and practice of citizen science around mobile phones and some solutions that are emerging within a new epistemology, and we'll explain that a little later. So, a few not small challenges face this Earth. These are three of them that WWF and IIASA have been doing a lot of analysis on. The first is that we're consuming well beyond our means. As a result of that, we're losing a very significant amount of the biodiversity of this planet, and climate change is a consequence of that consumption. A little more details on that, and this work comes from the Living Planet report, which is produced every year by WWF, and the Living Planet Index, which measures humanity's footprint on the Earth. It shows very clearly that we're living as though we had 1.5 planets at this moment in time. We're living as we're eating out of our own kitchen and going next door and stealing half the food out of the kitchen in the next flat. Except that there is no other flat. We don't have another planet. And if this continues, we're in very dire circumstances. By 2050, we're looking at eating 3 worlds worth of resources. This can't continue. If you look at what the picture will be like by 2050, we also will have a world where global income will be 3 times what it is at the moment. And that has all sorts of consequences. When you have a higher income, you'll eat very differently, you'll live in houses that are very different, you'll travel differently, the consumption rates will go up dramatically. We'll need 70% more food production than at the moment, but we have to find that production at a time when climate change will have kicked in and river basins rivers will be drier, rainfall will be less in some areas, crop production will be less. Even by 2025, 3.5 billion people will be living in stressed river basins. So it's a fairly urgent problem. Well, that's for humanity. For the rest of the species on Earth, the situation is already dire, completely dire. WWF has, over the last decade, looked very carefully at 10,000 species, the health of 10,000 species on this planet, higher animal species, and the conclusion is horrifying. Half of all higher animal life has been lost since 1970s in terms of overall numbers of biomass of animal life. And that's quite concentrated in the tropics these days. The temperate region, the pressure is reducing on biodiversity and animal populations are coming back. For the tropics, though, it's a catastrophe. And one example is this Annamite subspecies of the Javan rhino, which I was part of a project to test whether this species could be recovered. We thought there were five animals left. We found there was one, and at exactly the same time, we found the body of that one animal that had been killed and its horn had been removed. So this shouldn't continue, but it will for many years unless we can turn the situation around on global consumption patterns, on biodiversity, and on climate change. So how do we do that? A systems approach is absolutely fundamental, and we believe that because of the complexity of these problems, you do need to take a very complex view of how you can reach solutions. But those solutions have to be simple and they have to be very large. They have to work at the scale of millions of hectares of land. They have to work at the scale of millions of tons of commodities that are sustainable, millions of tons of CO2 reduced, millions, perhaps billions of people informed and active. And what are the ways to do that? here's some signs of the possible ways forward. Oops, excuse me. So protected areas, WWF has helped to develop protected areas in the Amazon, the size of the United Kingdom. In Congo, we're working on green development programs that will change economies across a whole province, the size of Austria and Switzerland combined. We've worked for more than a decade to build platforms for sustainability of products such as wood. The FSC is now certifying forests the size of two Germanys. And right past us flows the Danube River, which is a story of remarkable transformation through cooperation across 19 countries. So it is possible, and there will certainly be the money for these sorts of solutions. This is an estimate that I've put together of the sort of money that's coming for environmental sustainability and climate change solutions. In Paris, we estimate that $20 to $30 billion will be available for addressing climate change and land use problems. The private sector is rallying with even more money, and this surprised me. The green bonds in 2012 were worth $3 billion. By 2014, they were $37 billion. This year, there will be even more, and this is accelerating. So private sector finance to make these changes is dramatically moving forward. But, and this is a question that we've been looking at very carefully, is where is mobile technology in this picture? What is the potential for mobile technology to change this picture? And we're not seeing the sort of scale of change through mobile technology yet impacting on land use and on environmental questions. This is a sign of what might be possible. This is an effort, a campaign WWF runs every year called Earth Hour, and we ask the planet to switch off the lights just for one hour. It happens in March. It has 1 billion people taking it up at the moment. Last year, 1 billion people took it up, which makes it the largest public relations event on the planet. Very exciting, but it only happens for 1 hour each year. What would happen if we could mobilize those 1 billion people to do an action all year? Maybe just one action. What would we ask them to do? And this is the question that we're very interested to look at. And can we use mobile phones? Because more and more of the planet is connected by mobile phones. So I'll stop talking and hand over to Linda, who tell you a bit about where we've reached in this exploration of mobile phones and land use.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. So I think that's a really critical question that you've put on the slide there. Can mobile technology help transform how we live on this planet? And the answer is unequivocally yes. And what's the reason for this? Well, I think it's partly due to the fact that there's been an exponential growth in citizen science initiatives. So citizen science, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, that's involving citizens in data collection, in idea generation, in analysis of information, and at the very highest level, the co-creation of new knowledge. Okay, so these logos here that you see, they're just a fraction of all the different citizen science projects that have appeared in the last decade. The only exception is this one here, the Audubon Christmas bird count. So this initiative has been involving citizens in observing birds since 1900. So really, some of these initiatives are actually very old, but we now call this citizen science. Other initiatives that you see here have led to new discoveries. So for example, this one here, Galaxy Zoo, that's led to the discovery of new galaxy by citizen scientists. This one here, Folded, this has led to the discovery of new protein structures, which have been published in Nature by citizen scientists. So this new generation of citizen scientists who are becoming co-authors on our scientific papers are really starting to change the way that we do science. But why is this happening now? So if we look at this, we can see that the answer is technology. So the start of that process was the internet, the Web 2.0, changes in the internet. What does that mean? That meant that users could start generating their own content for the first time. They could start sharing knowledge online. And I think social media is probably one of the best examples of this. But really, it's mobile phones that are the truly disruptive technology here. So if you look at the top photo, This is 2005. These are citizens gathered to hear the announcement of Pope Benedict. You don't really see a mobile phone. You see one just there. Then if you contrast that with 2013, so not that much in the future, here, citizens are now gathered for the announcement of Pope Francis, and we see a remarkable penetration of mobile devices. So therefore, what is the potential when we combine citizen science and mobile technology? So I'm going to give you a few examples. I'm going to start off with the global problem that is air pollution. And here's an example, iSpecs. So iSpecs is a project started in the Netherlands. These are a bunch of citizens here. They put a little device on their iPhone, and they literally do this, and then this measures aerosols. It measures size, the concentration, so it basically measures air pollution. So basically what they did is they took the data that were collected by these citizens, they compared it with reference data from ground measurement stations and also from satellite imagery, and it was astounding at how well these data sources matched. Okay, so this is a really, really successful example, and it's being rolled out now to other European cities. And basically the motivation for citizens wanting to get involved is because they want to know more about their own personal exposure to air pollution. Here's another example in a totally different domain. Now we're in natural disasters. And this is a MicroMappers tablet app, okay, and it involves citizens in rapid identification of areas of damage. So basically a citizen is given imagery from an unmanned aerial vehicle. So this takes place just after a disaster happens. They then find the areas of damage, and this information goes then very rapidly to the responders who need that information. And then another example. This is an example homegrown here at IIASA. So we've been developing this Satita Collect mobile app, and it's based on Geo-Wiki, which has also been developed here at IIASA. This is a project in collaboration with the Technical University of Vienna and also Doctors Without Borders. And basically the app is for gathering household data on the ground very, very quickly, so you can make rapid assessments of food insecurity and malnutrition. And then finally, I'm going to talk about Geo-Wiki. Can't not talk about Geo-Wiki if we talk about the kind of citizen science that we're doing here at IIASA. So we've been doing this sort of stuff since 2009. This is when we first developed Geo-Wiki. I can talk for a long time about Geo-Wiki, but I'm just going to point out some critical things. The first is this. So Geo-Wiki allows you to visualize disagreements in land cover. So this might be very surprising to you, but there are huge spatial disagreements between different land cover products. What does this mean? This means if you use one particular land cover product for your model, your output could look very different if you used a different one. Okay, so it's about raising awareness about this. But what did we do? We then used Geo-Wiki as a crowdsourcing tool. So we involve citizens. Okay, so here's our simple interface. We ask them to look at very high-resolution satellite imagery and tell us what they see. So what is the land cover there? And through various campaigns and competitions, we've collected 250,000 samples. And we use that to create improved land cover products. So here's a hybrid product. So this is an improved land cover product, taking into account those citizen-contributed data, plus all different land cover maps. We also have created an improved forest cover map, an improved cropland map, but we also create new products. So for example, this field size. What we did here is we asked citizens to tell us the size of agricultural fields, okay, from this very high-resolution imagery. And then we created this first global product of field size, and similarly with wilderness. So we've been able to create a lot of information from this citizen-contributed data. But more recently, we've entered the world of mobile serious games. So the reason we've done that is we wanted to vastly increase the data we've collected, as well as the participant base, so opening this up more broadly to citizens. So it's very simple. It's a game you can play on the desktop, on your mobile, on a tablet, and the idea is that you simply answer this question: is there any cropland in the red box? If so, you swipe it to the right. If the answer is no, you swipe it to the left. It really is like Tinder. I don't know if this is the right audience for that, but anyway. So this game ran for 6 months, and we were able, in that period, to collect 4.5 million of these sample points. So all our competitions over the previous years, we collected around 250,000, and suddenly with a game, we were able to collect 4.5 million. And what do we do with this information? We turn it into better cropland maps. And then the final one is our latest game. So Cropland Capture ran last year. We've learned from that, and now since 3 weeks we have launched this picture pile game. So this is a more generalized version of cropland capture. So basically we have piles of pictures and we ask people to sort them. And by sorting we mean classify. So here's an example. This is sort of our first pile. It's focusing on deforestation. So we have very high resolution imagery and we just ask people a simple question. Do you see tree loss over time? And we use that information to improve the knowledge we have about deforestation. And in the future we'll be adding other piles to do with natural disasters, to do with water scarcity, et cetera, et cetera. So now I'm going to hand over to Paul, and he's going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing jointly.
So this is powerful stuff, I think, and WWF has seen the value in this. We've been working with IIASA to solve the problem of illegal logging, particularly in the Congo. We've developed a platform called Moabi, which allows anyone to report illegal logging across the Congo. They can upload it using mobile phone onto a web platform or enter it onto a web platform. You might say there's not much mobile coverage in the Congo. There isn't. But if you hear the story, you can then report it to someone who can report it to someone who then has a mobile phone who can send that story in, and we are getting reports, and they're being uploaded onto these platforms. Another problem that we're just starting to look at is the question of land tenure uncertainty. This is at the core of so many global problems, not just environmental loss, but also poverty and inequality and corruption and so forth. And it's an ambitious one to take on. I was staggered to find that 75% of the world's land is unregistered, that the tenure is unclear at the moment. This is 3 times the size of Russia. What can we do to solve that problem? We're not doing it. A small group in Amsterdam has formed a business which we're supporting called LandMapp to create a mobile device that allows a farmer like these ones in Ghana to walk around their land, map their land, put it up on a web platform, invite their neighbours to confirm that is their land, and then move towards getting certification of that land. So land tenure, it solves the problem of land tenure, or begins to move towards that at least. It's only a step in the process. But what we're also discovering as we build this, as we pilot it, is that it could also be a solution to traceability of products. There's a call for deforestation-free products. With LandMap, we hope farmers will be able to demonstrate that they haven't deforested their land and so have their cocoa, in this case, recognised as deforestation-free. So how does it work? For the farmers, this is an example from Indonesia, in Sumatra. They receive a land profile after they've walked around and mapped their land and confirmed this with their community. Working with the government, that can then be recognised for a land certificate. This is not necessarily titled, but under recent UN conventions, a certificate is sufficient to allow for microfinance, for instance. And the app will allow people to apply for microfinance directly based on that land certificate. So it brings microfinance directly into the hand of your farmer in Sumatra or in Ghana or Costa Rica. This is the hope, at least. As I say, this is at a test stage. For buyers who are buying cocoa, in this case, let's take cocoa as an example, it gives them the opportunity to see what individual farmers are producing and to also assess what sort of products and volume of products are coming out of an area, to see that spatially as well. So it's an early concept. It's still in development. We're piloting it and looking for investment at the moment. So if you know any investors, do let me know. But what I'm particularly excited about is that this is using a business approach to the development of an application, a mobile application. And this is something WWF has not done much of. But we're seeing enormous power from this. The business intelligence of understanding the customer, the business intelligence of thinking about operations and scaling operations, the business intelligence of communicating very clearly is really, really a great advantage.
Okay, so some of the lessons then that we've together learned from the mobile citizen science that we've been doing. Okay, first of all, that you need to think very carefully about how you engage citizens. So how do you effectively use media to do outreach? But once you've gotten the outreach, once you've engaged the citizens, how do you then keep them? And I think feedback is a really important part of that. So listen to what they say and have an open dialogue with them all the time. But do not underestimate how much time and resource that takes. Also, gamification is clearly shown to be a very promising way of engaging more citizens, but it's a learning curve for us. We're constantly learning as we're building these games. And incentives, what sort of incentives should we be offering? Co-authorship on papers, tablets, prizes, or is helping science good enough? So we're still struggling with that. And then also design for scaling. So never mind design. The design has to be good. The user interface has to be good. The mobile has to be easy to use and bug-free. But what about designing for scaling? So we don't want to just reach 100 people, 1,000 people. We want to reach 1 million people. And what happens then? So you might have little pilots, but you must do some major stress testing. If you suddenly have a media campaign and 1 million people come to your server, is it going to break down?
Focus on the big problems, I think we've been talking about, and big solutions. It takes as much work to solve a big problem as it does a small problem. So join together with others to see if you can solve those bigger problems. As I said, build with business people. They really know about scaling. There's a whole lot of learning in the business community about managing something very big once it takes off. And that's important. And we'll say a little bit more about this one, platforms. We're producing products, but if you look at the Geo-Wiki, for instance, this is an open platform that anyone can step into and create their own product, whether it's wilderness maps or climate estimations or whatever. This is a very powerful platform that allows all sorts of other things to take place. And the business world has a lot of experience in doing this. It's a very, very powerful concept that we should be considering as we build our products.
Okay, and now we have 3 questions for you to think about. So the first is, how can we engage citizens in helping to improve our and your science, as well as policy making? Where can you combine your efforts with others and rethink for scale? So really scaling up these efforts. Are you talking to business people, to marketers, communicators to sell, systematize, fund, and scale your science? So these are quite different questions, I think, than have been asked in the past.
And while you're thinking about that, I just want to tell you a little story. I was walking a couple of weeks ago through the streets of Geneva and walked past this building, and it had on it Lutheran church. I thought, that doesn't look like a church. The guy who's loading the bags there happened to be the pastor, and he said, would you like to look inside? So we went inside, and this was the church. It was a very different space to the Catholic cathedral just up the road. It had been designed for a completely new epistemology, where you talk directly to your God, you don't talk through the altar and the priest. Now, we can have our theological discussions about that, but I think that shift happened because of the Gutenberg revolution and the printing of the vernacular Bible. It changed the world many years ago. We now have the internet and mobile phones, which is creating a complete epistemological shift at the moment that we're only just beginning to understand. And to show you, we'll show you what's happening with that epistemological shift in the business world.
Yes, exactly. We would argue that this epistemological shift has already happened in business. Business is embracing this idea of platforms and not products necessarily. So I'll give you some examples here. So you probably recognize this, Skype. Everybody uses this. Well, Skype is basically the largest telephone company in the world, but it owns no infrastructure. Facebook, the largest media company in the world, yet it doesn't generate its own content. This is Alibaba, the largest retailer in the world, yet it doesn't have any goods. Uber, this is the largest taxi company in the world, and it doesn't own any cars. And then finally, this one here, this is Airbnb. So this is the largest accommodation provider in the world, and yet it doesn't own any hotels. So then if we go out of the business world and go back into citizen science, we have the Sci Starter site, and it's a little bit like that. It's a place where you can register your own projects, where citizen scientists can talk to scientists, where scientists can talk to scientists. So it's a little bit like that. It's evolving towards that.
So had we world enough and time? These are words written by an English poet in the 1650s, Andrew Marvell. He was actually trying to get his mistress into bed at the time. But I think it's very apt because we do have world enough now. IIASA and WWF have produced the Living Forest reports, which say very clearly there's enough forest, there's enough agricultural land to produce all of the food, fibre and fuel needed for this planet, even as population rise and even with some reasonable level of climate change. It's a question of political will, it's a question of governance, and it's a question of having the tools to bring about that change. We think that mobile technology has enormous potential for this. We're only just beginning to tap this. What we don't have is the time. These are extraordinarily urgent questions that have to be solved, and the solution, we hope, is with all of us. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, yeah, sure.
Great presentation. Let's open it up for some questions. Yes, Robert?
Hi, no, that's really fascinating stuff. I was going to ask, once you have people involved in collecting the information, creating the science, does that lead to them helping to, be involved in solutions based on the science? And have you thought about that part of it?
Yeah, actually, that isn't happening really in our particular project. Generally, they collaborate in the sense that they provide data, okay? In our early campaigns, actually, the top 10 people became co-authors on our papers, and those people did engage, but that was a bit of a self-organizing community. They were actually academics and students. In the game, no, I think at this stage, we're not actually involving them in that next stage, that co-creation stage or that idea generation stage. There are many citizen science projects that do that. We would, of course, like to do that in the future. But I think even though we started in 2009, I think we still feel a bit like we're new to this game, because it's constantly changing.
And I think that this is a very smart question, because it's exactly the question that Amazon had when they formed themselves. They formed themselves to sell products, but now they're in television. They're in a whole range of other things. So if you think from a platform approach rather than just the product approach, it forces you to think about how do you use the person who's engaged in your platform for the next step. It helps you to think about a wider ecosystem of change and interaction that you can create.
Yes, Ray.
What about privacy concerns? And you seem to be trusting the companies, and some other people's thoughts are just the opposite. So once the whole world is under 5 companies, what do we do next?
That's a very good
Do you want to
question.
start with that one?
Well, I think, that's very interesting. I must admit, the stuff that WWF is doing, they're the ones really exploring this business angle. I think at IIASA, we're still actually just doing scientific research. So the privacy is more about making sure we anonymize people's records, knowing the EU laws on privacy, and making sure that we're not breaking any of those laws, and just safeguarding people. So I think we're not at a stage yet where we're in bed with business.
And from the point of view of LandMap, for instance, land tenure is probably the most sensitive question when it comes to privacy. I mean, the whole land tenure system of the world is built on privacy and respecting privacy. So
Public knowledge elsewhere.
sorry?
Ownership of the land would perhaps be public to the companies who are intermediaries here. So
Well, this is the
you don't know what land I own, but in the future everybody knows what Africa is.
Exactly. This is a core question that we're struggling with LandMap, and it's exactly the question that Facebook has with ownership of data. they realise that that their customers have to be able to turn on or off the privacy or openness of their accounts, and then Facebook has to be able to protect that privacy if someone decides on it. Of course, this raises a set of questions that will go on forever. But business, I think, is aware that it won't be successful in the long term if it can't respect privacy.
Yes, good question.
Linda and Paul, it was fascinating co-production and really nicely brought. I would like to ask you more methodological question, and I will start with a little story. And this is given by a feeling which I am kind of torn apart by, which is a combination of a love and hate for the big data at this point. And I will explain why. I am myself a numerical model mathematician, and I remember 80s where we started as a postdoc to get the first access to the big computers where you can solve numerical equations. And suddenly we went there. And the original strive to find the solutions without number crunching was kind of slowly disappearing. So we ended up now in the world of having 38 climate models, which are becoming more complex, and basically we can do everything because everything can be numerically solved. I don't think we advance much in understanding the structure of the climate system. We still have a problem to parameterize clouds. We still have a problem of to downscale some of the processes. Now this is just a bad part of the story. If I look at the way how the big data citizen science develops, we have now huge revival of information. We have a revolution in getting data in. But where is the limit? What do you think? How far we can go? What is the QA/QC issue here? And if we involve in this way everyone, where is the understanding? Do we really develop understanding based on structures and empirical inversion? Or I'm just trying to look ahead 10, 15 years. I was actually shocked and happy at the same time to see this picture of 2 inauguration of different poles, because it's only 7 years. I mean, where are we in 15 years? What are we going to do with our understanding of the way how system functions?
Would you like to go first?
Knowledge is not wisdom, is it? These are two very different things, and how we use our data and how we as many communities come together and decide on the questions that we want to answer, that's fundamental. Technology can help with that, but it won't give the answers. It won't even ask the right questions necessarily. It's about wisdom and the wisdom of communities. How we create those communities these days in the world of mobile phones, I don't know. They're being created all the time around us. And I think the exciting thing is that there is so much experimentation happening at the moment, and especially if you look in the world of some of the impact entrepreneurialism, young people who sit on the edge between science, business, and NGOs. There's so much innovation going on there, and they're creating communities every day. So I don't think I've answered your question.
Maybe more specific. Carlos Nobre and I and others from NASA, US, we went to the Amazon for 15 years. We put up everything we could find to measure all the processes from the microscopic scale to the satellites. So it was a huge campaign trying to understand the functioning of the system in its natural state and then to predict what happens when you deforest, right?
Yeah.
Now that campaign was $300 million a year campaign, which was supported by NASA. If I would go do it now, probably I would ask a lot of Amazon citizens to send me information about, for example, the growth stage of the soya field. Is it the same quality? How do I rely on this data? What is the quality assurance of information? Can I build my models based on the quick replacement of the in situ measurements, satellites, by using citizen science? I'm just overstating by purpose, but that's my question.
Yeah. No, we wondered whether we were in the right conference because we didn't have any mathematical equations in our presentation. So I'm going to hand you over to the mathematician to answer that question.
Not a mathematician, but no, I think there's an incredible amount of work being done on the quality assurance of citizen-contributed data. So even simple things like like majority. So the more observations you get, for example, for OpenStreetMap, the more people who've contributed to a given location, the more accurate it is. So it starts to become this wisdom of the crowds. So there is a little bit of that, but to be honest, there are a lot of techniques being developed for QA and QC, and I think that will only just accelerate in the future. I mean, there are a lot of studies where, like even for this iSpecs example, where they do always try to take the citizen contributed data and then see how well it performs against authoritative data. I think there's an awful lot of that going on. And I think it's about coming up with relationships to do with confidence. So eventually you can be confident in the data, or at least you have some kind of filtering mechanisms in place that only the most confident data is actually then put into a database and used. So I think that's one thing. But another comment about the big data, I think it's just, there's so much happening in the data mining world that I think once you have this data, you can do amazing things with it. And I think of this great talk that Stefan Turner gave, actually at IIASA at lunch, where he had, I don't know if Stefan's here, but he had this great database of medical records from the insurance company. And he's basically, through networks, has shown a lot of very interesting relationships. And what he said is that 80% of these relationships are known. For example, if you have diabetes, you have a greater chance of having X and Y. But what he said was, it's those 20% that we don't know that are coming out of this masses of data. And maybe some of that knowledge will come out of this citizen-contributed data, and we will start to understand processes better.
Great. We had a question over here, if you could.
Yes, or merely a comment, because I'm returning back to the theme that Pavel presented about that, how do we know what are the system functions and how we collect better information about system. We have a very good example from other part of IIASA, from ASA. We are studying platform-centric economic ecosystems, such as Airbnb and those that you presented in your material. And we have an interesting challenge because we are studying something that does not exist, or we have only a very few examples of this new type of economic activity and organization form. So we decided to involve 5 universities in Japan, Singapore, Finland, UK, and US in order to put together a competition where students are sending us good ideas and descriptions about how future platform-centric ecosystems, how they could look like. And that will be our data that we are going to study. So I think that this kind of citizen science or student science, in this case, it will help us, especially us that are studying something that we don't know about at all.
Very good.
All right, we have a question here. Okay.
I have a critical comment and also a question how you do deal with land rights with people that are nomads or hunt and gatherers, especially as you mentioned Indonesia. What I know, there are many hunt and gatherers live in the jungles that are threatened by agricultures in their environment because they are cutting off the jungle and getting more land. So how do you secure that the land of the agricultures is really from the agricultures, only by the neighbors? And how do you secure the land rights that is no man's land because it's of nomads?
Yeah, good question. The Indonesia, last year, the Supreme Court of Constitutional Court of Indonesia passed a judgment that told the Forest Department to hand back land to indigenous people that where a claim could be proven, where there'd been continuous occupation. And that, by current estimations, is about an area of land about 5 times the size of Germany. It's an enormous area of forest, mostly forests. The question now is, how can the indigenous organizations, indigenous people, and indigenous umbrella group help communities to map their own land? They simply do not have the resources to be able to do this. So they're talking with the LandMapp team about doing a trial with indigenous communities to map their own land, so they can then get those shapefiles included in the claim to follow up on the Constitutional Court decision. This will be revolutionary if it can work. On the other side, a friend of mine in the Philippines who I work with, she was the leader of the Philippines Cordillera People's Association, one of the main indigenous groups from the Philippines. She's very distressed by the fact that most of the young people in her community sit there and play on their phones. They're not interested in going out in their forest. They're not interested in managing their land, and they're interested in moving to the town as soon as they can. She's hopeful that if she can put a way of interesting them in land onto their phones, that will bring them back out into the forest where their elders have spent a significant amount of their time. So two potentials for where this might go. There's, of course, an enormous number of dangers and mines along the way that will blow us up, I'm sure. But, yeah.
Right, we have two questions here. Here. Yeah,
well, I still want to continue with this dangerous.
Please do, come on.
I mean, she's so confident that, but I mean, none of the stock market crashes has been predicted by these fancy computer systems that there are, because they are filtering, they are averaging, and they are safe. Same thing with if you start a revolution through the mobile phones, your systems would never realize it. So we have to really see that it's a tricky device. It can be both ways, and how you spread something through it, cyber terrorism through mobile phones, easily imaginable.
True.
Yes. The atomic power is also the atomic bomb, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I think you can always use these technologies in evil ways, unfortunately. But if you look at something like Twitter, there's a lot of not useful information in Twitter. But an example again with this micromappers, what they do is they have volunteers who curate tweets, and if there's something useful for a responder, then the volunteer, these are just volunteers. They'll go, yes, that's useful information. So I mean, there are ways of dealing with some of this information. I mean, I take your point, but I think we have to focus on the positive uses of these technologies.
Right. Thank you.
Perhaps I can just add to that building this with these applications and these products with the people who will use them is absolutely fundamental. Co-creating them with the communities who own the land or are dealing with the problem hopefully deals with those issues of privacy and the dangers before the system itself becomes solid. So that's a fundamental principle of design.
For Paul Chatterton, my name is Marco Morosini, ETH Zurich. I'm here. Hello. On consume more wisely. You showed three main ways towards sustainability, and one is consume. You put the words consume more wisely. May I dare to suggest to change the wording and to write in clear words, consume less. You must know WWF in Italy 20 years ago made a very small advertising that used to be published by the media for free. And it sounded, before going shopping, think twice. And if you really don't need, don't buy. Well, no newspaper published it for free. So WWF Italy said, well, we will pay for this. No media published it. Because these are simple two words that for me they are the very key to sustainability, consume less, are a complete taboo everywhere, not only in the media, also in these 3 days, nobody dared to say or to show this simple idea, consume less. This idea was present in the public discourse in 1976, for example, at the United Nation Cocreation Summit in Mexico. There was, the discourse at that time was also on the need that in rich country, consume levels should be lowered in order to allow other people elsewhere to consume more. So I suggest to say in clear words, less, not simply wisely. Lady Gaga or Silvio Berlusconi consume more wisely in their way. It's too generic to say wisely.
Give him a round of applause. I agree. I agree for the rich countries. That's not a message that I would tell people in a Congo village. It's a very tough message in a Congo village. So to find a message that works for the whole world, perhaps that one is not the best one. But I agree for the rich world, it's absolutely an imperative. And we had a very interesting debate as we were with IIASA was involved in this as we put together the Living Forest report, because it became very clear that meat consumption was a major source of the problem. So we debated, we have partnerships with the beef industry, with many beef companies. Do we put this message in here? But it was compelling. It was absolutely clear that living, if the world had a more vegetarian diet, or particularly the rich world had a more vegetarian diet, this would reduce the footprint on the planet and take some of the pressure off. We did include this as a scenario, the less meat scenario in the Living Forest report, and I'd encourage you to read it. But you can imagine the discussions that went on around this one.
Well, great. Thank you very much. This was a really great panel. Any final thoughts, comments? Thank you.